Section 14 of The Lost Oases by Ahmad Muhammad Hassanayn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15, Kufra, Its Place on the Map. Friday, April 6th. The day began with the arrival of an immense bowl of roses, gloriously fragrant, sent by Sayyid el-Abid. This is the way the desert belies its name every now and then. I defy the Riviera to produce anything finer than these, or more fragrant. It was Friday, the Moslem Sabbath, and I attended prayers at the mosque. The young Senussi princes were expected, and some of the Bedouins came in their best clothes, but side by side with the richest of silk kuftans were the shabbiest jerds. Everyone took off his slippers as they came in. I watched them for a while. There came a prosperous Sawaya or Majbari merchant with a crease still fresh in rich robes just removed from the chest, and coal in his eyes, put in with a madwid, a coal stick, of ivory or brass. The prosperous man maybe has everything upon him new, and he smells strongly of scent, perhaps pure rose water distilled in Kufra, or else musk or other strong perfume from the Sudan. He enters in a dignified way and takes his place. There comes another, and his jerd is tattered and his face is bronzed and withered, not flabby, but he is no less dignified. Clothes play but a small part in this assembly because of the natural dignity and courage of these people, and those qualities are brought out in relief even more by the tattered jerd than by the fine silks and scents, which sometimes take away something of the personality of the individual. A slave comes. He is the favorite slave and confidant of one of the Senussi chiefs. His silks are as rich and even more vivid, and there is little to suggest servility. He feels his importance and walks with equally dignified grace through the ranks of the worshippers to take his place, maybe next to a dignitary, maybe next to a beggar. At the mosque, the poor not only stand on level ground with the rich and the prosperous, but in a subtle way they have their revenge. For in the house of God, the master is God, and the beggar may feel as great or greater than the rich man, since he is not submerged in the luxury of the world and forgetting God. The old and shabby jerd is, to the Bedouin going into the mosque, as fit a garment for worship as silken brocades are proper raiment for a man going to see the Senussi chiefs. The worshippers are now ready. The Muezzin has finished his call to prayer. There is a hush. The young Senussi princes are entering the mosque. They take their places that have been reserved for them. All eyes turn toward them, and on account of their youth, they look a little shy and embarrassed. No one rises as they enter, for this is the house of God, wherein God alone is the master. Then the imam mounts the pulpit and delivers his sermon. On the few occasions that I have been able to attend Friday prayers in an Oasis mosque, the theme of the sermon has often been the same, advising the congregation to shun the world and its luxury, and to prepare for a life of happiness in the next world by doing good. Beware the ornaments and the luxuries of this world, for they are very enticing. Once you fall a victim to them, you lose your soul and stray farther from God. Draw nearer to God by doing good deeds and obeying His commands. This life will pass away. Only the next world is everlasting. Prepare yourselves for it, that you may be happy in eternity. The interior of this mosque is beautiful in the simple dignity of its lines. The walls are bare, whitewashed, scrupulously clean. The floor is covered with rugs or with fiber matting. The worshippers squat cross-legged upon the floor in a very reverent attitude. There are perhaps 200 of them, ranged in rows, all facing toward Mecca. There are some who count their prayers upon rosaries of amber beads. Others, too poor to have rosaries, record the number of their prayers by opening and closing their fingers. There are some whose every movement betrays opulence and prosperity. Others, Bedouins of the desert, have a faraway look. The most striking impression is the serenity and contentment written on their faces. Even upon the pinched and haggard face there is an expression of equanimity which shows that the man has accepted his fate. It is written there that he is living on the verge of starvation. Yet he does not rebel. After lunch at El Abid's, Solomon Boumatari came again to talk about the trip south. He reported that Buhalega and Muhammad, who was to be our guide, had met and talked things over, but Buhalega was still unwilling to go. Abdullahi had spent the day at Joff gathering what information he could about the Uinat route and trying to find out if the Tibus would let me hire camels from them for the journey thither. After dinner at El Abid's, I spent some time in Sayyid Idris's library, which he had instructed Jadawi to throw open to me. Imagine a room of medium size filled with chests containing books. The ceiling is decorated in vivid colors, the work of an artist, a lover of the Senussis, who came from Tunis simply to do them a service, just as in medieval Europe, painters and sculptors devoted their lives to adorning churches. Every bit of wood in the room has come from Egypt or Benghazi. There is a window open to the air with only wooden shutters as a protection against the sun. It is not easy to move about, for books and chests of books are arranged along the walls and in the middle of the room as well. There are many very ancient chests used as cupboards and at the same time fitted with attachments at the sides which enable them to be straightaway loaded upon a camel in case of need. The library is somewhat out of order, books piled carelessly one on top of another, for Sayyid Idris has long been absent. There is a great number of manuscripts enclosed in beautifully tooled morocco covers. There are modern books printed in Cairo and in India. There are manuscripts from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. With the exception of a few books in the Persian language, all are in Arabic. There are 2 or 3 manuscripts of the Koran illuminated in gold. It was a great privilege for me to be allowed to go into this library, for as a rule, no one is admitted. I found many manuscripts laboriously written on ancient parchment, works on philosophy, the Arab language, theology, Sufism, a few on poetry and mysticism, another on talismans and magic. Many were the interesting and pleasant hours that I spent among the collection. The surroundings and atmosphere were just right, so remote, so many miles from the world, one felt in the mood to absorb the thought to be found in these manuscripts. Sit in a comfortable chair in the midst of civilization and try to read such books. One ring of the telephone would be enough to make them appear archaic. Saturday, April 7th. A fine pair of shoes came as a present from Sharufa. The chief of the Zawayas came to pay me another visit. We talked over our coffee about Zawaya history. I learned that it was not the Zawayas who first conquered Kufra from the Tibus, but the Gawasi and Jahama tribes. The names of 2 of the Kufra villages, Talab and Zuruk, are family names of the Jahama tribe. I gave each of my visitors a photograph of the group which I had taken several days before, and they were delighted with them. I realized to the full that day the perils of Kufra. Rolfs almost lost his life here by violence. I almost lost mine by kindness. I lunched prodigally at El Abid's as usual, and the meal was followed by coffee, 3 glasses of tea with amber rose water and mint, and 3 glasses of milk enriched with almond pulp. The Sharufa insisted that I should come to his house, and offered me 3 glasses of perfumed tea, followed again by 3 glasses of almond-flavored milk. I reflected that to refuse was to offend, and gulped down the beverages, which by now had become somewhat nauseating. The end was not yet. Shams el-Din hauled me off to his house and set before me biscuits and nuts and a huge glass of sweet syrup. It was almost more than flesh and blood could endure, but to refuse was to offend. There followed 3 glasses of coffee, but I stalked forth with all the dignity of a man going to the gallows or the Spartan boy with a fox gnawing at his vitals. As I lay down in my room to recuperate, many thoughts surged through my brain. Would that the Bedouin, whoever he was, who selected 3 as the mystic number to characterize desert hospitality, had died unborn. But it was lucky that he did not hit on 7 instead of 3. I came to the desert perfectly prepared for destruction by the hand of nature or hostile man, but the idea of perishing through indigestion did not commend itself to my sense of the fitness of things. And yet, at the proper time, I went to El Abid's again for dinner. Some of the Bedouin chiefs were my fellow guests, and once more the route to the southward was discussed. Buhalega persisted in his refusal to go by way of Uanat. The conditions laid down by Sayyid Idris, he said, called for a journey to Wadai and not to Darfur. He would send neither his camels nor his men that way. I argued like a lawyer that since he had contracted to provide 35 marhalas, or days' journeys, from Kufra southward, it should make no difference to him whether I used those marhalas to go to Wadai or to El Fasher or back to Egypt. He was unconvinced by this ingenious reasoning, but when he realized that I was determined, that El Abid was not opposed to my plan, and that I was willing to take fewer camels than originally stipulated, he gave a reluctant consent. But he would not go himself or send his men. Sunday, April 8th. The affair of Buhalega's horse came to a head. I bought him for £33. He was sturdy and a splendid traveler, needing to drink only every second day. After luncheon, I took El Abid's photograph and had a long talk with him about his malady, which he bore with true Bedouin fortitude, about conditions in Cyrenaica and Egypt, and about my plans for the trip to the Sudan. I had had bad luck with my scientific work at Kufra. I did not find it easy to escape surveillance and move about unattended, or to use my instruments without arousing suspicion. What was worse, it had been cloudy every day since I arrived there, and I had been unable to take observations of the sun or Polaris with the theodolite. After dinner, I was thoroughly tired. I had used up all the indigestion tablets which I brought with me. I felt that it would be a relief to get back to the simplicity of the open desert again. Monday, April 9th, was still cloudy, but a cool breeze was blowing. I spent a quiet day reading in Idris's library, developing a few films, and buying gerbas and barley for the journey. Sayyid El Abid gave me copies, written with his own hand, of letters by El Mahdi to various Ikhwan. He made me presents of a Moorish knife in a silver scabbard and a flintlock pistol, also beautifully inlaid. Tuesday, April 10th. The clouds cleared away in the afternoon, and I took photographs of the valley. I arranged with the shoemaker for shoes for myself and my men, and for bandoliers which the men insisted on having, in view of the alarming rumors they had been hearing. I met Muhammad Sukar, who was to be our guide over the Uanat route for the first time, and liked him. Wednesday, April 11th. El Abid had heard of my purchase of Buhalega's horse, and sent me a Tuareg sword and an Italian carbine to carry when I ride him. At last I was able to make observations with my theodolite. I was anxious to see how my results would agree with those of Rolf's. Thursday, April 12th. I sent Sayyid El Abid my shotgun as a gift. In the afternoon, I rode with Sayyid Muhammad Boutamanya and Zerwali Tajaf. We were met by the chiefs of the village. I visited the souk, where the weekly market was being held, the Zawiya, which is the oldest Sanusi school in Kufra, and the mosque. Jaf is the trade center of Kufra. It was interesting to find side by side in the souk rifle cartridges whose markings showed them to be 30 years old, Italian tomato sauce in tins from Benghazi, blue and white calico made in Manchester and imported from Egypt, and leather, ivory, and ostrich feathers from Wadai. These products of the south, however, are not plentiful now in Kufra, except when a merchant who has brought them from Wadai is prevented for some reason from going on to the north to sell them in Egypt or Cyrenaica. Kufra had seen its best days as a trade center before the occupation of the Sudan. Then it was easier to find an outlet for the products of Wadai and Darfur through Kufra than by way of the country to the east. Even now, however, there is a contraband trade through Kufra in female ivory and ivory of less than 14 pounds weight, the exportation of which is prohibited by the Sudan government. In addition to the trade that passes through Kufra, most of the big Zawaya chiefs who have enough slaves go in for agriculture. They raise barley and maize. The Senussis are more progressive and grow melons, grapes, bananas, marrows, and other vegetables of the more delicate kinds, all of which are a great treat after the monotonous fare of the desert. They raise mint and roses, from which they make the rose water and mint essence so essential in their ceremonies of hospitality. From a few olive trees, some olive oil is produced in primitive presses. The animals of Kufra are camels, sheep, donkeys, and a few horses. Meat, however, is very expensive, as there is little grazing for sheep in the valley. The animals are fed on pounded date stones, which do very well as a staple diet, but some green stuff is necessary at intervals. The Senussis, who are in everything more progressive than their neighbors, raise chickens and pigeons. The price of slaves, I learned at Kufra, has risen a great deal during the last few years because there are no more slaves coming up from Wadai on account of the vigilance of the French authorities in that province. Occasionally the Bedouins get around this by contracting a marriage with a slave girl in Wadai, and then, when they come back, divorcing and selling her. On one of my travels in 1916, I was offered a slave girl for 6 gold louis, 120 francs. Now the price varies from 30 to 40 pounds. A male slave costs less. The Bedouins sometimes marry their slave girls, and if one of these bears a male child, she automatically becomes free. The Bedouins have no prejudice against color. That is, if the slave bears the head of a tribe, his eldest male child, that child ipso facto becomes in his turn the head of the tribe, however black he may be. Whereas the children of slaves are slaves, the child of a slave girl and a free man, however poor, is always free, and even though his father dies and he is left an orphan, he can never be a slave. The lot of a favorite male slave especially is preferable. They have more power and are taken more into the confidence of their masters than free men. They are very well treated and become members of the family. They are well dressed, for an ill-dressed slave reflects badly on his master, just as a shabby footman would detract from the glory of a millionaire's Rolls Royce. The favorite slave of Sayyid Idris, Ali Khaja, is not only the most trusted man of Sayyid Idris, but he has more power and authority among the Bedouins themselves than many a free man. Such a slave is treated as a confidant. If the slave of Sayyid el-Abid came to me with a message, I took it to be absolutely true, knowing that it is his duty to report exactly what he is told. In the same way, if I wished something to reach the ears of Sayyid el-Abid, and only his ears, I knew that I could tell it without a moment's hesitation to his slave, and be perfectly confident that it would not go anywhere else. A man-slave is permitted to buy a slave girl. Once, when I asked Ali Khaja about the price of slaves, he complained, "They are very expensive nowadays. The other day I bought one, and she cost me 40 pounds in gold sovereigns." He said it with such an air that he might never have been a slave himself. The shabbiest slave that you see in an oasis is generally the freed slave, who, curiously enough, is looked down upon by the other owned slaves, and himself feels ashamed that he is a freed slave and belongs to no one. There are many date trees all through the Kufra Valley, and many of them belong to the Senussis. When the Zawayas invited Sidi ibn Ali al-Senussi to come to Kufra, each one of them gave the Senussis 1/3 of his property, land, and date trees. The proportion of 2 to 1 between the date trees owned by the Zawayas and those of the Senussis has, however, in the years since then, been considerably altered in favor of the Zawayas. These regular inhabitants of the valley naturally planted new trees faster, and thus increased their own holdings. One can still see in the valley the walls separating the Senussi lands from those of the Zawayas. On our way back from Joff, we met a wedding party. The officer commanding the troops at Kufra was being married, and the father of the bride invited me to empty gunpowder in honor of the occasion. I was glad to pay a compliment to the officer, who was an old friend of mine, and when they fired their guns in salute, in good Bedouin style, I rode my horse at a gallop up to the party, pulled him to a sudden halt in front of the bride, and fired my gun into the ground before her. It was astonishing how Baraka, the moment he heard the sound of the guns, took to a gallop and brought me at a rush within the prescribed distance for firing. It was all a part of his training. Friday, April 13th. A slave of Sayed Idris came to be treated for an illness which had lasted for 2 months. It seemed to be a digestive upset with continual vomiting. I gave him ether on a piece of sugar, milk, and rice, and by evening he was better. Buhalega arrived from Hawari with 17 camels. I told him to complete the 25 we had agreed upon. I received a visit from the bridegroom and his father-in-law, who came to thank me for the compliment I paid to the wedding procession. Saturday, April 14th. Buhalega brought the rest of the camels. He was in a dilemma about sending a man with us. He did not wish to send his son or even a slave on such a hazardous journey which none of us might get through alive. On the other hand, there was the off chance that fate might be good to us and let us escape. In that case, remote though it seemed to him, if he had no representative with us, how should he get his camels back, or rather their value? For it would be the natural thing to sell them at the end of the trip. The afternoon was spent in packing, and the evening in making observations. The weather was now more gracious. This was only the 3rd night since reaching the spot that I had been able to see Polaris. I determined that I would not leave Kufra until I had made at least twice as many observations on different nights. Sunday, April 15th. The morning was spent in loading. Buhalega was still in a quandary about sending a man with us, but since I had the camels, it did not make any particular difference to me what he decided. The slave whom I had been treating was astonishingly improved in health. He came to thank me. No one was more surprised than I at what I had been able to do for him. At 2, the caravan set out for Azila, the last well of Kufra Valley on the south. There we were going to do taghees properly, taking several days for perfecting our final preparations. I had bought 2 sheep for Busavar, as none of us had made this journey before. All my men had been newly clothed and made a cheerful sight in spotless white with red shoes. Their carefully cleaned rifles glittered as they hung on their backs. Most of the new camels looked fresh and strong. Monday, April 16th. Abdullahi took the horse to Taj for shoeing, as I found that the stony ground was too hard for him. I sent a brass tray to the commandant as a wedding present, and the last 3 bottles of Bovril to Idris's sick slave. Our departure was postponed because the guide was still occupied before the Cadi with a legal matter over a camel. Tuesday, April 17th. I had breakfast at Solomon Bu Matari's in Jaf with Zerwali, Abdullahi, the Commandant, Salah, and Muhammad Bu Tamania. The rest poked fun at the Commandant because, being a new bridegroom, he would not partake of a dish cooked with onions. "They do not forgive when they are young," said Bu Tamania, winking at the Commandant. I bought a hedjin, or trotting camel, for my own use, paying £9 for it. We were, at last, ready for the start the next day. As I made my last observation of Polaris, I had a strong hope that I should have succeeded in putting Kufra into its proper place on the map. I had been keen to check Rolf's determination of the position of Kufra, which he made from the observations of his companion Stecker at Boma. Taj had not been built in Rolf's day. When I made my first observation at Taj, I discovered that they were not in agreement with the result of Stecker's observations at Boma, which is 2 kilometers from Taj in a direction 54 degrees east of true south. I thereupon determined that I would not leave Kufra until I had secured a sufficient number of observations to preclude the possibility of any appreciable error. Polaris was observed with the theodolite by me on 6 different nights, under conditions which Dr. Ball, in his scholarly paper on my work published at the end of this volume, declares to leave no room for an error greater than a single minute of latitude or longitude. The net result of my observations, when they were finally reduced after my return to Egypt, was that Kufra is some 40 kilometers south-southeast of the position assigned to it by Rolfs from Stecker's observations. I found the altitude of Kufra to be almost precisely the same as that ascertained by Rolfs, 400 meters for Bouma on the floor of the valley and 475 meters for Taj on the valley's ridge. End of section 14.